and I'm your host, African History Professor Hicks. And I'm broadcasting today. It's a late Sunday. I shouldn't say late, it feels late, but it's only about 8 o'clock. And preparing for tomorrow, which will be our final broadcast on the Stono Rebellion. We will then begin to move on to other African centered rebellions that sort of pushed us towards the Declaration of Independence signing. Just a reminder, you know that this series will be going on up until July, this issue of the American Revolution, as it relates to the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And as such, we would like to tell the story, side of the story that we are concerned with. And some of that would be in the form of rebellions. There were so many slave rebellions between the Americans and the Caribbean that it was very difficult to try to gather them all. So what I've done is I selected a few, starting with the Stono Rebellion. Actually, we started with the Yamasee Rebellion. That was back in the 17, I think, 30s. But we started with the Stono Rebellion because it's very, very significant. Like Nat Turner's Rebellion, these are very two significant rebellions. Except for the Stono Rebellion was a little earlier than Nat's. And it had a lot to do with the forming of the Declaration of Independence, its signing, its consequences, and particularly the consequences of African people and Native people. And I posit, as I did a couple of days ago, that the American Revolution set back emancipation for Africans even another 200 years. So I believe that the American Revolution was directly related to our enslavement and the enforcement of stricter black codes and black laws across these United States, as they called themselves then. Remember, it was only 13 colonies, three or four prominent ones. The others were just kind of coming along. So we've already talked about some of these incidents and things leading up to that. So today or tonight, I'm going to give you a quick overview and leading us up to the final rebellion that I will be bringing to your attention tomorrow. So we want to talk about these particular people from Angola, Congo, because these people were primarily responsible for many of the maroon communities in Jamaica, maroon communities in Haiti, in Cuba, many and most of the rebellions that were started and began with these people, and there are many reasons why. Lots of it has to do with religiosity or spirituality. For example, in Haiti, one of the reasons why it was so successful was because of the spirituality that was involved and how all those in that community were able to, how do I say, were able to engage the spiritual aspect of revolution. The spiritual aspect of revolution. And as such, they were able to defeat the French, the Spanish, and the English, all not together, but each army that came into Haiti, Saint Domingue at that time, was defeated by these people, and mainly because of the religious and some of the spiritual aspects of what they brought with them from Africa into the New World. Angola and Congo were leading in this adventure. The Angola, of course, was in Africa, and the Congo was also in Africa, and the Portuguese that eventually had direct control. Now, I don't want to go back too far, but for those who were in tune with me, you know that the Portuguese found their way into Congo, Angola, and eventually they were able to take direct control. But the uprisings that followed um, were primarily the responsibility of many of these Congolese and these Angolans. Yes, and spirituality and the practice of it through the Catholic religion was means by which they were able to come together on a common cause, which was the spirituality, African spirituality. And I portend, or I say that that is going to have to happen again in order for Africans to come together and to throw off this yoke of European imperialism. So let's start. So we're going to talk about the Congo and the direct Portuguese control. Now, the south of Congo, Portugal established a port there called Luanda in 1575, forming the colony of Portuguese Angola. Now, Angola became a major slave export hub. All right, the primary source of enslaved Africans were sent to Brazil. Brazil presently has the largest population of African people outside of Africa. Okay, and as I mentioned before, we should all remember that most of the slaves did wind up in Brazil, not in the United States. So the base from which Portugal dominated Central African slave markets was here in Luanda. Millions of Central Africans, many from former Congo lands, were transported, of course, across the Atlantic to the Americas. And what were the long-term consequences of this? The destruction of one of Africa's most sophisticated early states. Remember, or I should remind you, that we discussed how the Angolan state was not a tribal society, but it was a state functioning like a state, like we are familiar with today, not little tribal societies. So, one of the long term consequences of the direct control of the Portuguese was the destruction of sophisticated early states. Also, one of the consequences of that was cultural and demographic devastation. All right, once a European comes in and takes control of your state and imperializes your state, things began to change, particularly culturally. Language, practice of different rituals, clothing, foods, and such, and particularly intellectual stimulation or lack of it. So the deep Congo Brazil connections, they have connections even to today with the language, religion, and DNA. You can check DNA, or DNA reveals that people from Brazil have Congolese and Angolan descent. Now, the Christian African traditions that survived in diaspora. Now, the Christian and African traditions that survived these invasions, I say, were pretty much were developed by the Africans only because when they saw Christianity, it reminded them of something. It reminded them of their own spiritual religions. Remember, Christianity is something that the Europeans and the others who were involved took African thoughts, African spirituality, even African practices, and made it Christianity. But we won't go there now. So why does this matter? Central Africans were so prominent in the early revolts. Central Africans, these people, Angolan and Congolese, were all very prominent in early revolts, whether they will be in Brazil or the Caribbean or the Stono rebellion, as you will see. That's why this is so important to that. The Christian literacy seen among some African rebels surprised the Europeans when they went to put down these revolts. Some of the dancing and some of the different rituals that they were doing during the revolt, Europeans or white folks thought that it was some way of them partying. Did not understand that this dancing and singing and shouting and shout rings were part of a form of communication during strategic warfare. Early European African alliance turned into extractive empires. So the alliance that started with copper, the trade of copper and other such materials, now trade went into a tribal warfare, because now the tribes are fighting each other for the influence of the Portuguese. You know, the Portuguese have advanced weaponry that tribes could use to fight each other, and of course, the one who had the most advanced weapons most likely would win the war or the conflict. So, one of the consequences of this direct control of the Portuguese was that the empires began to fight each other, the Congolese empires, and began to extract the gold in the form of people. All right. Let's see what else we can. Even today, some of the Congo descendant population. Um, Here is a example of Congo descendant populations, um, and who were they? So the Congo descendant populations, these are the populations of people that I just mentioned who were at the core of all of these rebellions. Um, Primarily refers to people whose ancestors come from the Kingdom of Congo. So these Congo descendant people, their ancestors were the ones who were in charge of the Kingdom of Congo. They had several neighboring Central African societies: the Ndongo, the Mantaba, and the Longo. These were all central tribes or societies, I should say, that existed in Central Africa, where many of these rebels had come from. Some of them were speakers of the Bantu language, especially Kikongo and Kimbundu. These two languages were mainly spoken, and when transported to the Americas, these languages were used to communicate with each other, particularly in times of strife and rebellion. So, Brazil, as I mentioned already several times, is the largest Congo descendant population outside of Africa. Roughly 40% of all enslaved Africans sent to the Americas went to Brazil. And of course, in a large proportion of those people came from the Congo and Angola region. Some of the cultural, some of the cultural survivals, things that survive from their culture that we see even today is a candombele, and I'm trying to forgive my Spanish, candombele, and this is from Congo Angola nation, the candombele. Capoeira is what you see the Portuguese practice, the Brazilians practice today, a form of martial arts, dancing, and communication. All right, and these were the major resistance communities: Quilombo dos Palmeiras, Quilombo dos Palmeiras, and these were African fighting communities who are now speaking Spanish based on the Spanish imperializing their nation. So these are some of the cultural antecedents that were left behind. All right, by these descendants of people. All right, and again, for those who just tapping in, we're giving an overview, and we'll be concluding our Congo, not Congo, but I should say our Stono rebellion tomorrow. So I'm going to give you some backdrop with that. All right. So again, enslaved Africans here were disproportionately from Central African states. These Africans, I mentioned the Haiti rebellion, the Haiti revolution, and during this revolution, they had resorted to their African voodoo, as you guys call it, voodoo. All right, and of course, most people have a wrong perception of voodoo. It's normally looked at as something as a very negative or something that someone uses to hurt someone else through spiritual means and practices. But these practices helped us maintain, survive, and to overcome and win some of these rebellions. Okay, so when they are looked at upon as something that's negative or Satan-like, these are injections put into European people. This is not what the African spirituality systems ever did. These systems were used to help for survival, for advice, for consultation, for meditation. So there was something called in the in the Congo kingdom called the cosmogram. And the cosmogram is something but a circle with a cross in it. So I mention this because when the Congolese saw the Portuguese crosses, they immediately were able to inject their own spirits and sense of spirituality in this because they recognized the cross, unknowing to the Portuguese and the Europeans. So there were strong links to the Congo cosmogram. I tell you, the cosmogram again is a circle with the cross in it. Ring shouts were a dance that many of the Congolese and Africans did here in the Americas, and it was symbolized of honoring your ancestors, okay? And also used during times of rebellion. So when the Africans were about to rebel, many times they went into these groups and started something that we call ring shouts, okay, where they're walking in a circle counterclockwise, and this walking in the circle reemphasizes the birth, the spirituality, the spiritual birth of a person, and it also is a way of reckoning with the ancestors. So ring shouts, burial practices. The Europeans didn't understand some of the reactions to the deaths of slaves because they would then join into a spiritual burial practice. Okay, so they brought those with them here, and some of these burial practices had spiritual symbolism. The Stono Rebellion was one of these. The one that we're going to talk about tomorrow was likely led by a Congolese Catholic. Not only was it likely led by it, but it was, and his name was Jimmy. The Gullah Geechee people, who we know should be very familiar with, who are in South Carolina near the beaches now, still to this day, they retain, I should say, Central African linguistic and spiritual features up till today. That's why I selected descendants, okay? Because some of the things that helped us overcome some of the repression that we were involved in was our spiritual practices. All right, and scholars trace many of these traditions to the Congo culture, by the way. This is where the Congo, all of these things that we see today in Cuba and Haiti and so forth, were pretty much brought here by these great people. So the Congo people known as Congas, their major influence in Palomante Cadabidos, and I'm not saying that well, so forgive me. These are cultural and societies and mutual aid societies. Congo traditions survive more strongly in Cuba than many other places, as well as Haiti had a large Congo presence in the Saint Dominique area, as we mentioned already. We've mentioned already that they practice voodoo. Um, the Congo descended enslaved people were often, many times, viewed as the most militant and rebellious. They also cost a lot more than regular slaves for several reasons we won't go into today. All right. The Colombia and Venezuela people also have maroon settlements. There's one I've seen on Facebook many times called the San Basilio de Palenque, and that is a maroon settlement that is still existing today. They retain many of the African grammar, and also they still retain a lot of this African worldview. So, what are some of the cultural markers of Congo descent? Now, we talking about this area that many of the rebellions, area that many of the rebellious people were coming from as enslaved people, bringing their practices, their culture, their intelligence, and their know-how to the Americas. All right, so across the Americas, the Congo descendant communities often share cross cosmogram. I told you about that a minute ago. I'm sorry I don't have a visual for you. Cultural forms of dance, call and response, where you hear in the African American churches all the time. Emphasis on ancestors, sacred trees and rivers and crossroads. Christian and African synthesis of Catholicism. One more time, Christian and African synthesis of Catholicism. And these features appear regularly in burial customs, church music, architecture, our music, resistance movements. Yes, still till today. So why were these Congo descendants so influential? Well, many of them came from centralized states with military organization, as you will see with Jimmy, the leader of the Stono Rebellion. They had long exposure to Christianity, also literacy and symbolic fluency, because when the Portuguese originally came into Congo, remember they came as partners, so they exchanged literacy, education, Of course, other cultural things like religion. Also, they brought with them experience with warfare. All right, due to the Portuguese disruptions, they were able to fight each other and fight others and fight the Portuguese, gaining lots and lots of military experience, particularly European military experience. And of course, the people of the revolution, those rebellious people, shared a cosmology, as I mentioned, that was adaptable across regions. So they were able to communicate with each other, even though they weren't from the same town or they didn't speak the same language. The commonality of African traditions helped them overcome this problem. And as I mentioned, I will continue to mention, these Congolese were overrepresented in all the rebellions. They were mostly the founders of most of the communities, maroon communities, even in Jamaica. All right, so let's see what else. Now, these Congolese people absolutely continued to practice their spiritual traditions while they were being Catholic. I say this because at the beginning of this at the beginning of this topic, we talked about how they had adopted the Christian religion so wholeheartedly. All right, and they, even though they did practice and adopt that religion, they still continued to practice their own spiritual traditions while being Catholic. And in many cases, they reframed Catholicism through reframing it now, changing it and adjusting it through Congo cosmology. So you're taking Catholicism, the cosmology of Catholicism, meaning the crosses and the symbols and the rituals, and now you're going to integrate it or reframe it into African cosmology, rather than abandoning it altogether. So why give up my traditions when I can easily simply integrate them into what I'm adopting to now or adapting to now? What emerged was not a simple syncretism, but a Congo Christian worldview that endured in Africa and in the Americas. Now, the early conversion of these Congolese people started pretty much top down. It's important to understand that. The Kingdom of Congo officially converted to Catholicism in the late 1400s, but conversion was top down and strategic. The rulers of Congo adopted Christianity as a powerful foreign spiritual technology. Yes. What is that? Core Congo beliefs were never abandoned. Instead, Catholic elements, as I've mentioned, were absorbed into the Congo metaphysics. The Congo spiritual framework never, ever disappeared. Now, just for your information, if you want, just some side information. The name of the cosmogram, the circle with the cross in it, is called a Daikinga. The Daikinga in the Congo language. It is the heart of the spirituality of the Congo spiritual belief. A cross within a circle. It represents a cycle of life, death, and rebirth. This cycle you will find culturally throughout Africa. The horizontal line of the cross separates living from the ancestors. The crossroad is a portal, not a symbol of death. When the Congolese saw the Christian cross, they already understood it on the Congo's terms. When you look at such things as an ankh, you can see the same cosmology that the Congolese are referring to. The cross and the crossroads and the symbol. And all of these have the same symbol, have the same meaning. All right? They will go into the Ankh meanings. Okay? So we can understand why the Congolese immediately were able to adopt to this new, as they thought, new Christian language, okay, or Christian, I should say, well, Christian practices. So when the Congolese saw the Christian cross, they already understood it in Congo's terms. They took the saints, the Portuguese saints, and they called them Nkisi. The saints are called Nkisi, spiritual forces. The Catholic saints were interpreted as Nkisi, powerful spiritual intermediaries. Saints equal spirits with specific functions: candles, metals, holy water, activated objects. Churches and sacred sites like ancestral groves were part of this whole cosmology. Okay, let's see what else I can give you guys on this for tomorrow. We're going to come to the Stono Rebellion. You're going to see how all what I am giving you now is very instrumental in understanding the Congo, or should I say the Stono Rebellion, and many of those afterwards. So when we get to the other rebellions, we won't have to go through this because you understand how these people were able to motivate themselves into such. I mean, most of these rebellions, they knew they had they had not cared about death. And when you really study old African spirituality, you understand that death is a partner to life. So these African cultures understood this very clearly. Something that we have lost today. We cling to life so hard and so strong. Um, this wasn't the way we always were. We understood death as a partner. We didn't fear it. Um, People, I watched recently a documentary on the Hazabi tribe, and one of the elders was asked how old he was, and he looked and said, "Why? What difference does it make?" All right. Some African societies never even had or believed in ancestor worship. They just lived. And what they didn't understand in terms of spirituality, they accepted as what God has given them. That is on the earth and the fruits of the earth to provide you with sustenance so you can stay here. So there was no questioning. And then some societies really delved deeply, really deeply into spirituality, like the Egyptians and the Sudanese, or we would call them the Nubians back then. Okay? All right, so let's see what else we can gather. Um, all right. The Stono Rebellion is widely believed to have been led by Congolese Catholics who spoke Portuguese. This is why, when at some point during their rebellion, it was reported that they were in a field dancing by some white folks who were running, who were running, uh, but they didn't understand what these Congolese were doing. So they spoke Portuguese. They were bilingual or trilingual. All right. They spoke English. They spoke Spanish, English, Congolese. You know, you should know that when you speak two language, you automatically incite another level of intellectual activity. Because people who have the ability to speak two language have went to a level that many people who's monolingual have not. And that's another story for another day. All right, and they also understood during the Stoner Rebellion. They understood Catholic symbols. Catholic symbols. It was very important to recognize the enemy's language and its symbols as well. They reimagine they reimagine freedom in Christian Congo terms. So what does that mean? It means that they try to maintain their worldview, their African worldview. You know, we live in the United States of America. We have a United States worldview, clouded by many things um, that really is not going to help us. We're clouded by many materialistic things that um, tend to make us more unhealthy than healthy, almost like Christmas. Christmas is a wonderful idea, but it's a horrible, horrible thing to millions of people who can't afford gifts and niceties during this time and period. Many people commit suicide because they can't provide gifts and niceties for their family. And everything is based off of money, because if you don't have money, you're not going to have a very nice or white Christmas. But we don't find this in Eastern, or should I say African spirituality. We don't find these things connected to each other. Prophets and megalomania and partying and self-gratification. These things are purely American. So they reimagined their Congo Christian terms. Congolese spirituality emphasized ancestors as active agents. Yes, before the rebellions, they pray, they dance, they do their rituals to energize them, to give them the spirit of resistance, and at the same time, gaining the ancestors' spiritual active agents. Sacred obligations to resist disorder. Yes, African spirituality teaches you that you have an obligation to resist disorder. Communal survival. You will find that Jimmy didn't just want to save himself, he wanted to save all Africans. You will see that through his rebellion, through some of his behavior. He carried this tradition with him. Communal survival over individual submission. Individual submission is a part of survival. Dying is a part of living. This type of worldview, of course, made spiritual practices a form of resistance, not a form of retreat. These Africans who engaged into these rebellions accepted death. The maiming of many of their bodies, a practice that the Americans would do, going back, I should say, all the way to 1620, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, when they had their battles with the natives, they would cut their heads off and put them on a stake. Well, Africans didn't care about that type of stuff. They worried not of mutilations. They worried not of dying. They knew resisting was a part of survival. That communal survival was more important than individual survival. So this worldview made spiritual practice, like in Haiti, a form of resistance, not a retreat. And as I mentioned, that the Congolese people did not abandon their spiritual traditions when they became Catholic. Okay. All right, I'm trying to build a little backdrop for you for tomorrow's reading, and then we're going to move on to some other things. And I just want to give you this one. I think this ring shouts. This was one of the cultural, I would say, practices that even goes on today. So ring shouts are one of the oldest surviving African-derived spiritual practices in the United States, a sacred communal ritual that blends Central African, especially Congo, cosmology with Christian worship. Despite the name, they are not shouted and not rings in the modern sense. So a ring shout is like a spiritual ritual in which the participants move counterclockwise in a circle, shuffle or glide their feet, never crossing them, sing and call response like you hear in church, and clap and tap sticks on the floor. So this was called ring shout. This is what our ancestors did as they went about trying to survive, whether it was through rebellions, whether it was through poisonings, whether it was through running away. These are the things they did to maintain themselves, their traditions, and their Africanness. Okay, so I've given you a lot there. We're on the line here now for about 35 minutes. That's good. Um, just trying to find out anything else that will enhance tomorrow's discussion. Um, I think that's going to be it. All right, family. I hope everyone had a wonderful holiday. I don't want to say Merry Christmas and that stuff because I don't want to offend anyone who does not worship or honor Christmas. In my family, we loved the holiday season, particularly Christmas. In my house, Christmas was always number one, and not due to religious reasons, but because it helped bring my family together. My son passed away from sickle cell disease, and as such, we constantly celebrate his passing. And Christmas was one of the times that he really enjoyed. So our family put puts a lot of emphasis on Christmas, but not from the religious perspective. So I hope that you had a wonderful holiday, enjoyed your Christmas. Um, it's about 8:30 now, and I will see you folks tomorrow on our Stono Rebellion conclusion. And with that said, I will say ashe and have a wonderful